Yo, what's going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and today we are going into this season. We are going into the 2022 NHL free agency class. Now, I want to preface at the beginning of this video, we are going to see changes to this list, and I have the top 20 for you guys today. We're going to really be going over the top 15, top 10 guys, but I'm going to give my predictions on where I think these guys will go, where they're at right now. So we'll be doing all of that in this video. So let's get right into it. This is a pretty interesting free agency class going into this summer. And there's a couple of pretty big names on the list. So to start off, we're going to go through the top 20 guys. And, some of these guys more or less are going to be depth additions, but really the top guys we're looking at today are the ones we really are kind of looking at as, these are the guys that you kind of have to consider are going to be maybe not core players to their team, but really good players that come a playoff run. These are the guys that can help you get to that next level. So I'm going to give you this list of 20 guys. Looking at the first couple guys, they're wingers. Number 20, we got Andre Burakovsky, who has been a very good player in his time with the Avalanche. He's a top 6 winger. Burakovsky is one of those guys, he could fit anywhere in that top 6. The only knock really on Burakovsky is he plays a lot with the better players on his team. Even back in his days with the Washington Capitals, he was in the top 6 of a very loaded Capitals team. So there is some questions about in terms of, if he goes to a lesser team maybe that has more salary cap space to bring him in, can he be the same productive player? That's the question there with Burakovsky. Nino Niederreiter, a former 5th overall pick back in the day of the Islanders, but Nino Niederreiter has been very good and has made a really nice NHL career for himself. And the thing about Niederreiter is he's gained some really good experience, gained a lot of confidence. He scored the overtime winning goal for the Minnesota Wild to send them to the first or second round of the playoffs. So he had that veteran tag coming into Carolina. He was obviously a big part of that trade to the Carolina Hurricanes. And the Carolina Hurricanes have had some pretty nice success with Nino Niederreiter in the fold. And number 18, Riley Smith. Riley Smith has been bounced around an awful lot. He was first with the Dallas Stars. He was a big part of that Tyler Seguin trade for, between the Bruins and the Stars. And he was a part of that deal going to Boston. Things didn't really work out in Boston. He ends up going to Florida, where he inevitably gets taken in the expansion draft, or at the very least was traded to the Golden Knights and has carved out an unbelievable career. And it kind of looked like he was a journeyman, and it didn't really look like Riley Smith was going to be for all matters, a top 6 player. But Riley Smith has really proved in Vegas with maybe a little bit of experience, a little bit of maturity, and just getting another opportunity. Riley Smith has been a very, very productive player in the Golden Knights' early success as a franchise, and one of those guys that they kind of stole back when they were an expansion team. So it's going to be interesting to see where Riley Smith's value is at, but I think he will definitely be a sought-after commodity. Speaking of another sought-after commodity, a guy that has currently won 2 straight Stanley Cups, and that is Andre Palat of the Tampa Bay Lightning. We have a bunch of wingers to start off this list. Andre Palat, again, is a guy like a lot of these other players we just talked about. He plays in the top 6, so the question is Palat as good of a player as we think he is, or is it because he's playing with Stamkos or Kucherov or whoever it may be? Is he driving the success of the team as a part of it, or is he the guy that's kind of just that guy that happens to be next to those guys and picks up points just because he's on that team? We're going to get a lot of those questions answered from Andre Palat, but you cannot deny the amount of experience, specifically in the playoffs recently. That will be a sought-after commodity. And let's be honest, chances are he probably doesn't return to Tampa. They just don't have the cap space. And his current $5.5 million or something like that, he is on an unbelievably good contract. So even if he were to make 7, that's still a pretty good contract considering what Andre Palat has pretty much meant to the Tampa Bay Lightning. If he goes elsewhere, though, again, new scenery could be a good thing for players. Could also be a bad thing. And I wonder if which one of the two we'll see for Palat. Next guy we got here is David Perron of the St. Louis Blues. Man, it will be disappointing to see David Perron leave the St. Louis Blues organization once again. He's from St. Louis. He has been with the Blues for as long as I can remember. He was, with the Blues. Then he was traded to Pittsburgh. Then he was traded to Edmonton. Then he was traded. He has been all over the place. So the fact he would be available on the market again, he's going to take less to stay with the St. Louis Blues. But the question is, do the Blues want to keep him, especially with some of these young guys kind of coming up like Dakota Joshua, Klimt Kostin? Is there going to be a role for him in the lineup? That is the big question that the Blues have to answer. And David Perron, I think more likely than not, will take a discount to stay in St. Louis. But again, we've seen this story before. He may find his way out. So that's something to keep an eye on there. We also have Evgeny Malkin, Big Gino Malkin. Now, recently he has come out and people have been asking him, now that he's back in the locker room for the Penguins. He hasn't played a game yet for the Penguins because he's been injured throughout the start of this season. But interviewers were asking him, what's going on with this summer? Are you thinking about the future? Are you going back to Russia? Are you going to leave to go to Florida or Tampa? And pretty much Malkin said what Malkin would have said. If I could have guessed, he said exactly the same thing. He basically said, I have the money. It's not about the money. It's where he is going to be the best fit and where he could win a Stanley Cup. And I think that's pretty clear when you talk to Malkin and you just get the vibe. You know what he's about. He's been with the Penguins since he was drafted the year before Sidney Crosby. So you do know for a fact that you have a good player, Malkin. Again, he has the 3 Stanley Cups to his name in their recent successes, even in the mid 2010s, even in the late 2000s, they won that cup. I think it was 07 or 09. They won a Stanley Cup then. So that is definitely going to be accounted for going into contract talks this summer for Big Gino Malkin. We also have another Pittsburgh Penguins player here, Brian Rust. Brian Rust is a very interesting player. Again, kind of similar to the guys we talked about earlier in the sense of because he plays with Malkin and Crosby, is he that good of a player? Or is it because he's playing with Crosby and Malkin? So that criticism is always going to be there. I could see him sticking around with Pittsburgh. It depends on the direction of the Penguins. Do they see themselves at the end of this season rebuilding? Do they see this as their final window to win? So that is some of the questions we're going to find out from the Penguins over the next couple of months, depending on how they do at the end of the season. If they go on a long playoff run, those kind of questions will be asked at that point. Up next here, we have a guy that just requested a trade out of Dallas, and that is defenseman John Klingberg. This is actually the first defenseman on the list that we have talked about. I think John Klingberg's interesting because of how things have kind of withered away. There was talk that maybe, right before the start of the season, that week, going into it, they were pretty close to getting a deal done. And it never really came together. And now things have kind of gotten to the point where it is just, I think John Klingberg realizes he won't be staying in Dallas. And his motivations there are pretty much done at this point. He's pretty much thinking, well, I know I'm not going to be here in September. I think he's lost a little bit of his mojo and motive. But John Klingberg is a really good defenseman, really good puck moving, really good skating defenseman overall. This is a guy that a lot of teams will be interested in, and that's something that is going to gain, again, it's going to be valuable for him. I could see him being a rental for a team at the trade deadline, maybe a sign-in trade, but John Klingberg will definitely be making some big money this summer, so that's another thing that teams will consider. I don't think he will be returning to Dallas. I'd say with a 95% possibility. Again, I'd give it a 5% because he's already there. 95% chance he will be out of Dallas by next September. The next guy we're looking at, again, we're heading back to Carolina, is Vincent Trocheck. Vincent Trocheck was a player that was around the trade deadline sent over from the Florida Panthers a couple of years back. And Vincent Trocheck has been a very nice piece to the Carolina Hurricanes. He had a couple of injury issues in the beginning of his tenure in Carolina, but has really developed into a really talented center. And a guy that can play the middle six. He could play the first line. He has done that at multiple stages for the Carolina Hurricanes. I really like Vincent Trocheck, and he's definitely going to make some pretty good money this summer. Again, as a center, all the more in his next contract. Again, we're heading back to Pittsburgh. This is the third Penguin we are talking about here, and it's Chris Letang. Chris Letang has been with the Penguins pretty much as long as Malkin and Crosby. A very tenured team, very tenderized player. He's a guy that's been there for a long time, one of their backbones on the back end for a very long time. And again, a very good puck-moving defenseman. The biggest critique for Chris Letang, though, he has the big name, but he has had a lot of injury issues. Staying healthy and consistently in the lineup has been the biggest Achilles heel for Chris Letang over the past couple of years. And what looked like a really bad contract for the Penguins, and a contract they really couldn't move just 2 or 3 years ago, now his contract is about to expire, and it makes you wonder what teams think of him on the open market. Does his value maybe go up because they're not trading assets to acquire him? Maybe they'll give up more in terms of, money. So Chris Letang is a guy I would look at maybe going to Montreal. I think he would be a really nice fit there. He's from the area, so that's something to definitely keep an eye on. Looking at number 10 now, we get to Ryan Strome of the Rangers. So Ryan Strome has had a very interesting history in his NHL career. It's been a very bumpy road for him. He was a first-round pick, and a really good one for that matter. But then we started to see some problems for him in terms of all right, so now continuing along with Ryan Strome. Ryan Strome is an interesting player because he's had a really interesting NHL career. He was a top 10 draft pick, again, of the New York Islanders. You could see how Garth Snow did a really good job with his top 10 draft picks. And on that list is Ryan Strome. Ryan Strome had a pretty decent career with the Islanders. He played a lot in the top 6 with Kyle Oposo, with John Tavares. But then he got traded. Got traded up to Edmonton for Jordan Eberle. The Islanders definitely won that trade. Ryan Strome, I think it took him at least like 3 or 4 months to get his first goal with the Oilers. And he was supposed to be a cheaper option than Eberle and bring kind of similar production. That did not work. That was a really bad trade, 1-for-1 for the Oilers. So then he gets sent to the Rangers for Ryan Spooner. The Rangers win that deal as well because now they get the better of Ryan Strome, and Spooner is pretty much dead, pretty much on dead water. So basically, the Oilers had traded a really good top 6 winger in Jordan Eberle for Ryan Spooner, and that did not really end well for them. Ryan Strome is one of those things where when you brought him in, it didn't work, and the second he left, he found success, and that is an epitome of what the Oilers dealt with. So I don't really see him going to the Islanders. I don't see him going to the Oilers, and quite frankly, I could see him returning to the Rangers. The only problem is they have a lot of guys they have to re-sign, and they already invested into Mika Zibanejad. They're probably going to see Vitaly Kravtsov as a top 6 center, potentially. So I don't really think we're going to see a guy like Ryan Strome stick around. I think he will be dealt probably, he probably won't get dealt at the deadline. I think the Rangers see themselves as a playoff team this year. He'll probably be their quote-unquote own rental, and they'll just lose him for nothing in free agency and see what they do in the playoffs this summer. That's probably what we'll see. Now we get to another defenseman here. We're heading to Hampus Lindholm. Hampus Lindholm is an interesting guy in the sense that, with Hampus, you're getting a guy that can be a very productive defenseman and is, if the Anaheim Ducks were to lose Lindholm, that would be a huge loss for the Ducks. Now, I think the biggest question for Hampus Lindholm is, where does he see the future of the Ducks? Is he going to be, it's kind of one of those, where are we going with this? And I think based off of what the Ducks have done this season, based off of how things have kind of gone so far, he's already seeing the future with Drysdale, with guys like, Terry, Zegras. I think he's going to stick around long term. The question is the dollars. And once that gets figured out, the Ducks have a lot of cap space. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. But I think if he is bought into the Ducks' direction moving forward, I think it's an easy signing for the Ducks to get back Hampus Lindholm. But again, the longer this drags on, the more that could be up in the air. Now we look at Nazem Kadri of the Colorado Avalanche. Nazem Kadri has kind of gotten a lot of second chances here. He had his opportunity in Toronto, really kind of was the, I guess you could say, what a lot of people would say is the focal point, the scapegoat of the Leafs' inability to be successful in the postseason. Yet he's doing similar things with the Colorado Avalanche, and has potentially costed them some playoff series in his NHL career. So the thing is, Nazem Kadri, when he's in the lineup and he's aggressive and a gritty player and tough to play against, throwing off the opponent, he's one of the best in the league. That's when he's in the lineup, though, because when he's not, the amount of money you're paying him to be a top six center, and when he's suspended for the rest of a playoff series, which means probably games 5, 6, and 7 at the very least, you're running into problems there. And that's where, unfortunately, his teams that he's been a part of, he's kind of let his teams down. And I wonder if that's going to come up for other teams when they bring him in. This has been a consistent problem for Nazem Kadri. So what do you really do with that? So that's something we'll look at. We just talked about a former Leaf. We're talking about a current Leaf, Jack Campbell of the Maple Leafs. Jack Campbell's going to get paid this summer. And unfortunately for the Leafs, I just don't think they're going to have the money to keep him. And I think they've kind of put their money into Peter Mrazek, which is even more concerning. But Nazem, we already talked about Kadri. But Jack Campbell, though, I think is a really nice goaltender. Based off of what he's done so far, we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. He had a really good 2020, a really good 2021. So I think based off of what we've seen from him over the last couple of years, who was, a guy who was really a backup for the most part with a couple of teams, really with the LA Kings, has come into his own, become a really talented, I would say a 1A, 1B starting goaltender at this point. I think plenty of teams will be going after him this summer if Dubas can't lock him up in Toronto. Look at Tomas Hertl. That's the next guy on our list. Tomas Hertl is going to have plenty of suitors at his door. I could see teams like the Boston Bruins looking to replace David Krejci. They could be a team. The Rangers looking to maybe upgrade over Ryan Strome, who we talked about. Maybe they go after a guy like Tomas Hertl. There have been talks about the Rangers going in on him. A lot of teams will be going after a guy like Tomas Hertl. You wonder if the Montreal Canadiens looking to add another center. The Minnesota Wild at the deadline, they could be looking to add. So it's really going to be hard to figure out where Tomas Hertl ends up, because I think there's at least 6 or 7 suitors for Tomas Hertl. The question is, where does he want to play for the most part, and is he more interested in the money or the closeness to his team winning a Stanley Cup? I think he's going to have to kind of decide between those two in terms of where he wants to sign. I think once we get a better picture of that, we'll have a better idea of where a guy like Tomas Hertl will end up. So the next guy we're talking about is Claude Giroux, the Philadelphia Flyers captain. He's been in the NHL for 15 seasons. He's been the captain of the Flyers for 8 years. And the thing about Giroux is, I just think the Flyers are going in a different direction. You look at some of that talent they have coming up. There are some questions about if they're going to need a rebuild, dare I say that, in the next year or two. But losing a guy like Giroux would be costly for the Flyers. There's a guy that's been around since the late 2000s. He's been a big part of the Flyers organization. You see everybody in Wells Fargo Arena, everybody has a jersey of Claude Giroux. Now the question is, again, where does Giroux go next? I could see him being a really good fit, again, probably with the Bruins, but more so his hometown, the Montreal Canadiens. And I think the Montreal Canadiens are going to be a player for a lot of centers this summer as they kind of look to fix that up. Anything really behind Nick Suzuki, I could see a guy like Giroux being a nice veteran presence there down the lineup for the Montreal Canadiens. We have another center here, Joe Pavelski of the Dallas Stars. I don't think he is going to be there past the deadline. I think he's going to be a rental somewhere, and maybe he finds a long-term fit with that team. Joe Pavelski has been a captain of the San Jose Sharks in his past. He's been a leader in the locker room in Dallas, so I could see Joe Pavelski, again, maybe not so much getting money for his skill, but he can still put up points. We're seeing that this season. But more of what he adds to the locker room, his leadership, is really one of the bigger things that you're going to get from a guy like Joe Pavelski. Moving up, we got now Philip Forsberg of the Nashville Predators. There's been a lot of chat since the beginning of the year on Forsberg. Once Mattias Ekholm signed, we were kind of holding our breath waiting for Philip Forsberg to sign. That has not happened yet, and it sounds more likely than not that he will be testing the market. Now, with the way the Predators are playing this season, the Predators may be able to lock him up long term. They lead their Central Division right now. They're playing really good hockey under their head coach, John Hines. So I wonder if that will come back in the conversation, or is it already too late for the Predators? So we're going to probably get a better idea of that. Again, kind of seeing how things play out the rest of the year. They'll probably keep him past the trade deadline. He'll be their own rental, and we'll kind of see how things go there. But as of right now, it's a little bit shaky on what's going to happen with Forsberg moving forward. Again, I don't think he would be against leaving the Nashville Predators, but I think it's more of just figuring out where the team is currently and where they will be over the next couple years in his contract. I think that's really more what Forsberg wants questions answered to. So we'll kind of get an idea of that. Moving up now, this is a name we've heard a lot about as well, and that's Johnny Hockey Gaudreau of the Calgary Flames. Now, if the Calgary Flames lose Johnny Gaudreau they keep him past the trade deadline, and he leaves the team in free agency, you kind of have that John Tavares effect going on in Calgary. I think they would be really disappointed. This is a guy that played on the East Coast in his younger years. I believe he grew up in Boston or Philly. He grew up in one of those northeastern cities. So the Flyers could definitely use a winger, and if they don't put money into Giroux, there could be a fit there for Johnny Gaudreau to the Flyers, maybe even the Devils to play alongside Hischier or Hughes. And I wonder if the Boston Bruins, I'm pretty sure he played at Boston College, or one of those schools again in the Northeast. So I could see Johnny Gaudreau being a very attractive option to teams in that region. Like I said, you're looking at probably the Islanders, the Bruins, the Devils, and the Flyers, maybe even an outside chance for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I would say those 5 teams, which should definitely be looking in at Johnny Gaudreau this summer. I'm not sure where the Calgary Flames are yet, but I could see them potentially moving him at the trade deadline. We haven't heard much about that quite yet, but that definitely has to be going on with Brad Treliving and the management there in Calgary, because they can't afford really to lose him for nothing this summer. And now the top guy on the list, I'm wearing his jersey today. He's the current captain of the Boston Bruins, taken over since Big Zdeno Chara left for the Washington Capitals. Patrice Bergeron is really one of those guys in the NHL. He got his own cover to the NHL game, the NHL franchise. I think it was NHL 16. Patrice Bergeron has been the face of the Boston Bruins. He was a big part of that 2011 Stanley Cup run they had, and he's really been one of the big leaders in that room since then, alongside Chara, Marchand, Krejci, really now Pasternak, right? All those guys. So Patrice Bergeron has definitely made himself a Selke finalist every year. He's one of the best two-way centers in the game, one of the best centers in general in the game. Patrice Bergeron is an interesting. There's going to be some questions with him because it depends on where the Bruins are going, and the fact the Bruins haven't re-signed him yet makes you wonder a little bit. What is he thinking? Does he want to return home to Montreal again? The Montreal Canadiens could really load up at this year's, pretty much this free agency. You look at some of these names, a lot of these francophones. You have Patrice Bergeron, you have Claude Giroux, you have Chris Letang. Those are 3 guys right there that could easily go to the Montreal Canadiens and be the core pieces moving forward alongside Nick Suzuki in the team's organization. I don't think they get all 3 of those guys, but it's going to be interesting to see what the Montreal Canadiens do this summer. I think they're a team that could go after some of these big-name guys and kind of try and get the fan base excited for this team after what has been a pitiful end to 2021 and a pitiful start probably to 2022. So, guys, that is it for today's video. If you like what we're doing here at Goal Line Hockey and want to see the latest news around the NHL, more videos just like this one, you guys know what to do. Make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and an even bigger subscribe down below. Guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.